And I like to be punctual when I can be. So welcome to the April 11th, 2023 meeting of the LAMP Board, officially calling this meeting to order at 1:30 p.m. First thing we're going to do is take roll call. I'm going to go around. As I say your name, please say present. Mr. Adams?
Present.
Ms. Kaufman?
Present.
Mr. Flowers?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Minch?
Here.
Ms. Robbins? Absent. Mr. Smith? Also absent. And Mr. Watson? Also absent. All right, I'll take a moment to read the civility clause. The rules of decorum and civility. It shall be the responsibility of the chair, or in the chair's absence, the vice chair, to promote and preserve order and decorum during board meetings. Board members shall neither by conversation nor otherwise delay or interrupt the proceedings or peace of the board, nor disturb any member while speaking or refuse to obey the orders of the board or its chair. We shall be respectful of one another even when we disagree. We will direct all comments to the issues. We will avoid personal attacks. All right, with that, we will take any general public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Those who wish to speak may have 3 minutes. Do we have anyone that would like to provide public comment for items not on the agenda?
Yes, please, ma'am. This is Ed Slavin, box 3084, staugustgreen.com. I want to thank all of y'all for your service. I want to thank you and the county for commencing with the next meeting. We're actually going to do these things live and on TV and in the county auditorium, as I've been asking for a long time. And several of the commissioners were outspoken in favor of that, as were some of the board members, and I want to thank y'all for that. Wanted to make an inquiry today, perhaps through the chair of the staff, if they could please tell the board who is going to assess cultural resources on properties that LAMP is looking at acquiring from now on. We had understood that the cultural resources coordinator position was abolished, and I've talked to y'all about that before. Now they say it's been combined or smushed together with an environmental tech position or an environmental specialist position. I'd like to see the paperwork on that. I'd like the staff and the county to start responding to open records requests with the due respect that is deserved, because it's Article 1, Section 24 of our Florida Constitution, which was adopted by vote of 83% of the people of Florida in 1982. That was 3.8 million people. That's the controlling legal authority here. And too often it seems when we ask for information from the county on these matters, as occurred when one of the Jacksonville TV stations did 2 stories about the cultural resources coordinator, county never responds. County doesn't approach things with helpfulness. County lacks a welcoming spirit. I know you all members of the board have a welcoming spirit, but you've got some staff people over there in that great big old building. By the way, I wanted to point out as to the level of funding for LAMP, and I know hopefully some other people will be addressing this, $500,000 is not enough. $2 million is not enough. And I would call your attention to the fact that our county is going to spend, do I understand, $12 million for a new permit building with 30,000 square feet. And yet we're not even spending the money to have a cultural resources coordinator full-time to assist the board and to assist the CRRB. Joe Biden's father told him when he was a little boy, show me your budget and I'll tell you what your values are. And it seems to me that the values in that there building where you're sitting right now is to rush through permits and rubber stamp as many things as possible for wealthy, dull Republican campaign contributors. And that's wrong. And people in the county are against that. That's why Krista Keating-Joseph was elected. That's why the 15% sales tax increase was not passed. We need a moratorium on development. We need to acquire more properties, not less. So I would suggest that if we're talking about how much is appropriate for the next budget for St. Johns County, the FY 2024 budget for LAMP acquisitions,
Thank
I
you,
think
Mr.
$12 million.
Slavin. Your 3 minutes.
Let me finish, please. Let me finish. $12 million, please. Don't interrupt me mid-sentence. That's not
Okay.
right.
Thank you, Mr.
$12 million
Slavin.
is my bottom line. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on items not on the agenda? Okay. And for the record, we'll note that Mr. Smith is in attendance. Okay. We will now move on to approval of our meeting minutes from the February 14th meeting. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to review the minutes. Are there any corrections? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes as written? Thank you, Mr. Miller. Do we have a second? Thank you, Mr. Adams. Any discussion on the minutes? All right, all those in favor of approving minutes as written, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. All right, the motion carries and the minutes are approved as written. Quick reminder that all board members should state their name prior to speaking. I will do my best also in recognizing people as they speak. But just remember, we are keeping an audio recording just so folks can recognize your voice. All right, moving on to approval of the current agenda. You will notice it is fairly light, and that is intentional. I have asked that we receive some updates on a few items and have a discussion about our process prior to any further discussion or evaluation of properties. Do I have a motion to approve the current agenda?
Moved. This is Travis Minch.
Thank you, Mr. Minch. Do we have a second?
J.D. Miller.
Mr. Miller, thank you. Any discussion on the agenda? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of approving the current agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The motion carries. All right, so we will start with agenda item number 1. This is an update on the new meeting location for St. Johns County Auditorium for June 13th, 2023, and I will turn this over to staff.
This is Ryan Malk with staff, and so today will be our last meeting until June 13th. Will be the new meeting in the auditorium. So this will be the last meeting in this building, Conference Room 1. It'll be moved to the auditorium, which is at 500 San Sebastian View. If anybody needs a map and needs to know where that building is, feel free to ask. It's the next building to the south of this building, down San Sebastian View. But so please plan to arrive 20 minutes early or so. Everything's going to be generally set up the same, just to get familiar with the setup over there. Staff will be there. GIS will be available like we do here. The voting will be by vote, as it is currently by voice, because over there I think the voting system maxes out at 7 individuals, and so we have a board of 9, so therefore we have to do it by voice vote. And so that basically is it for the first item. In case anybody has questions, go ahead.
Any questions? Mr. Miller?
Yes. Same time, correct?
Same time, yep, 1:30, and that'll be June 13th.
Thanks.
Other questions for staff from the board? Okay. At this time, we will take public comment on agenda item number 1. All right, hearing none, we shall move on to item number 2. This is an update on the property acquisition process for the current property ranking list. And I will again turn it over to staff.
Yep, this is Ryan Malk again with staff, and I'll bring up the list here just to have it. So just a quick update. Staff met with our county real estate department after our March 7th approval by the Board of County Commissioners of the LAMP property recommendation list. That's from 2022. So the next steps will be engaging appraisals on each of those properties that are on the list currently, the 5 that are currently on the list. And that's going to be, I guess basically the next step will be getting the appraisals and negotiations with the property owners to get a finalized price. and that will come up with a purchase and sale agreement. Then there will be a Board of County Commissioners consent item for May 2nd for approval of funding for those appraisals, since the LAMP funding is currently in reserves. So we have to ask for that for properties on the list. So once that gets done, then we bring the properties back before the Board of County Commissioners for a final decision to acquire the properties. And that's it for that item, in case there are any questions through the chair.
Can I ask you a question, please?
Yes, Mr. Miller?
So, appraisal will be done on all 6, and then, obviously, we know, for instance, number 2 is severely over budget for us, but that's okay. That's all part of the process. Do they, I'm assuming, like, and again, I've been involved with a lot of land acquisitions, they'll go after number 1, obviously, but if number, whatever, 4 or 5 or 6 is a very willing and active seller and is really ready to move much more quickly, I know this is up to the commission to vote on that, but then basically, I'm assuming real estate will then kind of not move that up to number 1, but push that up to the top of the acquisition process, yes?
Correct.
Right, sit there, right?
Actually, Jan Brewer, I think what will happen is there'll be a presentation to the Board of County Commissioners that would include all of it, right? And then it would be up to the board to decide
Right,
what they
that's
want
kind
to
of
do.
what I meant,
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Other question? Mr.
Yeah,
Minch?
question. I guess I'm curious about performing appraisal on all 5. I mean, is that a process that the county commission sets, or is that a process that we inform? Because it seems to me that paying for 5 appraisals before you know which one you want to buy, I don't know, that's a great use of funds, but any thoughts or concerns about that from anybody? Seems to be out of whack in terms of process, in my mind.
My understanding is that that's the county's staff process,
That's correct. So
not a LAMP.
the next step would be to get the appraisals done on each property. I believe item 5 or property number 5, it's the 600 State Road 13 North property owned by First Coast Energy. That may drop off the list because it's not currently available. That was recommended to LAMP through 2 commissioners. It's currently under contract. I think that was the one that was 2 separate parcels. The southern one wasn't available, and then the northern one is currently under contract, so that one will not have an appraisal because it's not available right now.
I guess the follow-up then would be any sense of the cost of these appraisals, and then who makes the determination of who's hired, or how's that appraiser selected?
Through the chair, this is Ryan again. And so that's through staff channels, and that's through our real estate department. They actually have a contractor that is willing and able to do that. And that's, I believe they've already had a request for quotes for that. And so, they're going to go through that channel. That's through staff.
This is Jan Brewer. The county does have a process for all appraisals. So, they've done this numerous times before. So this isn't new to them, and so they'll go after and use our same procedures. We do have to go out and do a request for quotes. So quotes will come in, a group will then look at the quotes and decide which is the best fiscally for the county to take.
One more. Yes. I'll take a break. So number 2 is $13 million plus. And I think we've got in our land budget, I don't recall exactly, $1.5 million. If this price estimate from the seller is remotely accurate, then appraisal, let's say it's within 90% of their assumed value. Is that money well spent to have it appraised? Because we don't have the funds to buy it.
This is Jan Brewer again. May I speak through the chair?
Sure.
The Board of County, this is in the Board of County Commissioners' hands now. You have done your job. You have made the list, you've sent the list to the board accepted the list, and it's moving forward. Now it's in the board and staff's hands to proceed. The appraisals will come in, that'll go back to the board. Again, it's up to the board to decide what they would like to do with the funds. They may say, you know what, number 2 is great, and we're going to throw in some general revenue. We don't know, but that's up to the Board of County Commissioners to decide after staff provides the appraisals and you have provided your list. That all goes back to the board for a public hearing.
Understood. I think it's
Okay.
Other questions for staff on this process?
Yes, Irene Kaufman. I was listening to the recording of the last meeting. Unfortunately, I was not present at the last meeting, but I listened very carefully to the discussion. And there was some discussion about easements. So is our purview something that includes some of these negotiated easements as a, we're called land acquisition, so that's not really acquiring the land, but it is, maybe it's considered a form of land acquisition if the county were actually going to maybe split up a property, a high-cost property with easements and purchase of the actual land.
Right, so as the LAMP program stands in the ordinance, we are allowed to consider conservation easements.
Okay.
And the purchase of those conservation easements, how that, again, our job as the board is just to say that we want that property to be approved. How those negotiations are undertaken beyond us is outside of our scope. But yes,
Okay.
we can consider easements, and in fact, we had one come up at the last meeting, and I'll speak about that later in my board
Okay.
report.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
Just as a general comment, and how I envision sort of approaching our part in the process is in discovering these parcels, if we get direct communication with owners, if we have that sort of direct line to be able to ask those questions, to provide that additional information on any given property, it enhances the overall sort of evaluation, I think. But knowing that that's an additional dynamic that can be added to a specific parcel, depending on what it is, just to consider it.
Okay. Other questions for staff on the acquisition process as to where it currently stands? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to public comment on agenda item 2. Would anyone like to provide public comment on item 2? All right, hearing none, we will go ahead and move on to item 3. This is discussion on the proposed land board procedures by the chair. So if you recall, during our last meeting, I asked if everyone would be okay with me taking a stab at developing a process for our work here at the land board. And some of our discussions that we've just been having are certainly relevant to what we're going to be talking about here. So there is a written process outline that's up on the table if you want it. Did not send this in advance because I wanted us to have an opportunity to walk through this together. But the intent behind doing this is for a few reasons. One, in the ordinance, the board is directed to help develop the process and procedures. I think we've made an incredible amount of progress in the first year. We've done some good work. We've got some forms we can use, but we haven't necessarily had anything in writing and formalized. So that's what I would like us to move towards in this process. So this is a discussion, okay, intended to talk through each of these different steps of the process and make sure that the board has an understanding of how this works. I think it's important for the members of the board to feel confident in how this process works and understanding how it works, because it's also important for the public to understand how this process works and to be transparent in how their properties will be evaluated when they come before the land board. So I'm gonna stand up. I also just want to look at you from up here. So one of the things, and this has kind of come up in our discussion already, is there are a lot of steps that happen between a project application and the acquisition. Okay, and there are a lot of different parties involved, but the LAMP board is really critical for two of them. Okay, so I think we just want to get some clarity around that first and foremost. You know, the LAMP program itself is a big program. The LAMP board, as an advisory board, has a specific role within this larger process. So we've got, you know, application, which is coming from the landowner. We're going to walk through each of these steps, by the way, so I'm just going to run through them fairly quickly. The landowner is submitting an application. You know, staff is intaking those applications. The board is helping do an initial assessment. You know, is this part of, you know, within the purview of LAMP or not? A site visit should occur, and these are my recommendations. I'll say that also. The LAMP would take a second look at a property for a final assessment and ranking, which would happen in a meeting. So this initial assessment and final assessment would be happening at meetings. Then that ranked list, as we've talked about, would be submitted to the commission, and at that point, it's out of our hands. Okay, so it's really up to county commissioners as to what they do with that list: approve, disapprove, modify, and then they are directing county staff to handle negotiations from there. So that is certainly not within the purview of the LAMP, although we hope everything goes our way. It's up to other folks at that point. And then hopefully we make it down here to acquisition, right? Because that's what we're here for. Okay, so I just want to refresh, and I will stop after each of these steps just to make sure everyone has clarity so you can ask questions. This is the process that I'm recommending, but I have done my best to combine the work that we've already done and how we've been working over the last year with best practices from other county programs like Volusia, Flagler, Nassau, and, you know, how land trusts work. These are standard processes. So the first step obviously is the application. We've talked about this. It can be submitted by the owner or an authorized representative. We're collecting a few pieces of information here: the applicant, information about the property, and something else that came up during our last meeting I just wanted to highlight for everyone. In this owner's authorization, it is authorizing the county and county contractors to enter the property for up to 180 days from the date of the application to conduct a site inspection. Okay, so there was some discussion during our last meeting about, you know, are we allowed to enter the property? Do the owners give permission? And yes, they will have signed this and said that they did. That doesn't mean the county is just going to show up or somebody's going to show up and do an inspection. Conversations will happen. It will be scheduled. But I just wanted to clarify that. So at this point, staff will intake the form. It's currently being sent to Ryan. And Ryan will make sure that there aren't any missing pieces. If there are, he'll get in touch with the applicant and fill in those missing pieces of information. Any questions about this step in the process? Mr. Mitch?
Yeah, two questions. Asking price, I noticed that some properties came before us that did not really have an asking price, others did. Do they need to give us an asking price in order to have a complete application?
I think that's a really good question. And something that also came up in the ranking valuation at the commission meeting, right? Because we're not able to evaluate properties across the board with an asking price, right? It's going to come down to the appraisal price. So in my opinion, that number shouldn't really have any bearing on our initial review.
And then how is that reconciled with, I think one of our criteria is, and I don't have that in front of me, I'm sure I can find it, but I think there was a criteria that kind of went back to cost or value or something like that. If we do not have a price, does that need to amend our criteria then? Or do we need to amend our criteria?
I think the answer to that is we should look at the criteria again and consider amending it.
Okay, and then second question, the owner's authorization, this may be a dumb question. What is the purpose of the staff's site visit? What are they looking to determine?
We'll get to that in a future step. We'll talk about that. Mr.
So
Step?
the asking price, I think it's valuable or relevant information, whether or not it requires a different decision, but I think anytime someone's looking to sell a piece of land and someone's looking to buy a piece of land, what their expectation is valuable information as the discussion progresses. So I would certainly have it listed, and I would want to know, and I sort of have in the back of my mind the fact that we're evaluating it based on that too, but anyway, that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay, I think maybe something we can consider for more discussion. And Ryan and I have had some conversations about that as well. And other questions about the application stage, Mr. Mitch?
One other question. We had talked at one time about the idea of properties being recommended by those that aren't necessarily owners.
Mhm.
Based on this, my sense of that would be whatever is happening in that conversation, ultimately it boils down to that owner has to authorize that, yes, they want their property to go through the process, even if some other people think it's a great idea. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say, and in order for a property to be evaluated, we would have to have that information and that consent. Yeah, but later, I think we should have a discussion about kind of that wish list type of property discussion, or if we want to propose a property and we're not the owner or know the owner, if there might be a process we would take to seek authorization from the owner. All right, everybody good to move on? Ms. Kaufman?
Irene Kaufman, yes, number 6, property description. So where staff is working with the applicant to fill in missing information, I see maybe that as a big one, because to ask the owner to describe their property, I mean, it's pretty open-ended, so I see that's where staff is going to work with the applicant to describe it in a consistent manner with other applications.
Great. Okay. Good on application? Okay, we're gonna move on. Okay, so we have a completed application. Now, the second thing that would happen is a desk review. And this is a typical step in an acquisition process. You're evaluating a property from the computer. So we're not investing a lot of resources into this at this point. We just need some basic information. So if we have a completed application, this would trigger the creation of an initial assessment package. So this is what we, the board, would receive in advance of our first evaluation of our property. So we would get that application. So we would see what the landowner has submitted. We'd get a property information sheet. This is that sheet that Ryan has been providing to us. It's a little bit more detailed, has some more information about zoning and other aspects of the property. And then at a minimum, I think we need a few maps, understanding where it lies within the county, an aerial image of the property, if it's adjacent to other conservation lands, and a land cover map, which is just going to say, is it wetlands, is it uplands, is there a creek on it, just some general information about the property moment. Additional information deemed appropriate by staff. There may be some other things that come up in discussions or things that staff feels like the board should know before this first assessment. And then the other thing that will happen, or that I'm recommending happens, is that the owner or representative is notified of the meeting date when their property will be brought before the land board. Mr. Miller.
Land cover map, I'm assuming you're talking about flux.
It could be flux, it
I
could
mean,
be,
that's the most consistent, it's easiest for you guys to pull. Secondly, I would suggest we add cultural resource desktop assessment as well.
okay. I think is that in the property information sheet that you've been filling out?
Yes, it should be on the data sheets.
Okay, so that should be covered in that data sheet. We've noted that.
And that would include, sorry, to finish the thought, so that would include, is it a Florida master site? Or where are there Florida master sites obviously adjacent or whatever? and also the archaeological model of the counties. Well,
Correct.
okay.
That's a soil probability? Is that what you're referring to?
It's more than that.
Oh, okay.
It is, soils are one component.
But it is a probability model.
I thought so, yeah.
It's high, medium, low,
Yeah.
based on a slew of things.
Okay, cultural resources will be covered. Other questions about this part?
And I
Mr.
don't know
Lynch?
that you necessarily need to see a map of it. I mean, we've got a lot of maps, but and I think Brian's been including this, but the zoning and land use designation, I think, are important.
Mhm.
And then I guess maybe a more broad question is, where does this exist in the realm of documents, like this whole procedure? I mean, are we doing a procedures manual that gets adopted by our board, and then is that codified anywhere? Or where do we, like, you got maps here, we're adding some stuff. Where is this codified in the LAM?
This is, so, let me get to the edits first. So if there are suggestions that aren't captured in this draft process, though it can be revised, we can incorporate those things. This is just going to be a consensus-based procedure that this board adopts for how we're operating.
How does that change when the board transitions?
They could make modifications to it, they could change it.
JD
Yeah.
Miller, would it be a good idea once this gets finalized, knowing that it's a working document, would it be a good idea to put it on the website?
I would recommend that
Good.
once it's finalized, that this becomes publicly available.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Questions about the desk review, or can we move on? All right. Okay, so now we've made it to our meeting. So in advance of this meeting, we, just like with all our meeting materials and the agendas, if we're evaluating a property, we'll have received all that information about the property. If the owner representative wants to present additional information, we could accommodate that. We'll evaluate the property, and at this point, we're really just trying to determine if this property meets the goals of the LAMP program. So do we want to invest more time and effort in further evaluation of the property and move it to ranking? So this would be a vote. If it's approved, that property would be added to a future agenda for ranking. We could request additional information that we think we're going to need to make that ranking. The owner would be notified that their property was approved if they're not at the meeting, and a site visit would be scheduled, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, if it's denied, if we as a board decide that this property is completely outside the scope of LAMP, just not something we're interested in pursuing, the staff would notify the owner of the denial and the reasons for the denial, and the owner would be given an opportunity to resubmit materials or, provide explanation for something and resubmit. If they don't want to resubmit, the property comes off the list. We would probably want to continue tracking those properties that we've denied, just so we have a record in case they come up again. If the owner decided to resubmit materials and we looked at it again and we denied it again, it also would come off the list at that point. All right, so questions about the initial assessment meeting? Seeing none, we're going to keep going. This is a site visit. So a site visit or a site inspection is a common practice in conservation acquisition. The purpose of a site visit is to actually get it down on the ground, not inspect the property, but view the property, identify any potential concerns, risks, or exceptional values of the property that we wouldn't be able to get from a map or computer, right? So staff, and this is a question for the board, maybe one board member conducts a site visit and completes a report. This report would be really basic. When it was, the property was visited, who was there, did we see some endangered species or something really wonderful? basically serving as a report out to the rest of the board. Yes.
If I may say, Jan Brewer, if I may say, county staff, this is not an area where county staff will be able to participate. You are the board members, you're the experts, you are the individuals that should be out in the field looking at the property. We can certainly make phone calls, hook you up with the owner, but we have several environmental individuals here, we have a real estate agent, we have people that are experts in their field you need to see the property, not us.
At any point in the process, do any county staff members step foot on the property before acquisition?
We would Jan Brewer, county staff would need to go out and survey the property, would need to do certain legal things such as that. But as far as evaluating, you've already done the evaluation. You've already ranked them and sent them to the board.
I guess my question is, the county is looking at acquiring a property without having someone visually inspect the property.
Actually, excuse me, Jan Brewer again, we do our due diligence. I mean, we
Okay.
wouldn't want to go and buy a piece of property that had, waste product or something on it. So there is a due diligence part of the acquisition.
So that happens after the commission approves the funding to acquire the property and you're starting your due diligence.
It actually starts when we do the appraisal and the board directs us to actually start negotiations. That's when we start to do our due diligence.
Okay.
Yeah, it's prior to acquisition, prior to allocating funds, any of that.
Okay. Mr. Miller.
And that is through primarily real estate department,
Correct.
or they need help.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. So, in my opinion, it's extremely valuable to be on site on a property before going through any further evaluation process. We know that if multiple members of the board wanted to attend, we would have to publicly notice this meeting. Okay, so things get a little complicated there. I will also say, as someone who has gone on many a site visit, it just becomes a logistical nightmare to try to accommodate a lot of people. If you need four-wheel drive, if you don't know if you're walking, you want everybody to hear the same information, receive the same information. So that's why I have a question mark here. We've had some discussions around, like, do we want to use volunteers for this? Is this, something board members would want to volunteer for? Interested in hearing your thoughts on this, Mr. Mitch.
I've got zero interest in going to properties to investigate them, nor do I think I'm qualified to look at it from an environmental standpoint. And I don't feel like that's how the process would work, that you're asking board members to go visit properties, but that's my opinion. I guess I would be curious, and I don't like the staff also going out there, because I think there's a little bit of a conflict when staff who has regulatory authority is also kind of going through a property. Like, if staff doesn't want a property to essentially be developed, and so the owner's coming to the county saying, hey, do you want to buy it? And then staff is gathering information, which they may then hold against the property owner, because now they've got regulatory authority, they picked up some ideas of what may or may not be on the property. To me, that feels uncomfortable. So what I would be interested in knowing, if it's possible, is could a property owner have their own private environmental consultant do a site visit for them? And is that, how much does that cost? But if it's like $150 or something for a quick site visit, or $200, is that?
Now you're talking thousands.
But does it have to be that thorough? I mean, we've had environmental consultants come out to our property and take a quick look for a couple $100. So, I think there is got to be some scale in terms of how much detailed information do we really need? Can that be done privately?
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be anything extremely detailed. We're not talking about doing a phase one or, a like really in-depth assessment. It's just, has someone been on the property and can confirm that it's not a dump site? Or this property has exceptional trail systems already on it. That's a really great selling point, and I think we should consider that, right? I'm thinking very basic here, not getting too far into it. But Mr. Miller, do you have another?
Yeah, I mean, I know Brevard County, and I think Alachua, they have a non-board appointed subcommittee, you can generally call it a committee. They have a group, and of course, they are volunteers, and there's some really highly qualified people that go out, and since it'll always have one board member on it, almost always, minimum, I mean, not a minimum, maximum, excuse me, one board member. And they go out and do a pretty nice assessment. Get 5 land managers as an example, or ecologists, whatever. They're going to do, a pretty thorough, quick assessment of a piece of property. And that's the way they do it. And that's just a thought. I'm not suggesting we do it that way, but that would be a way to do it. Get X amount of volunteers from the local community that have that kind of expertise and do it.
Well, this is a discussion, so I want to hear ideas, Mr. Adams.
I was just going to add that I think we talked about this over the last year, that any one of us can go out and take a look at a parcel. I know you said at one point you went out and tried to look at all of them if you could find them
I did, and
and that kind of thing. So I don't know, Elizabeth, if we're trying to come up with a SOP that we follow every time, or it's just like, hey, if JB wants to go out there and I want to go out there, we just have to be careful not to be out there at the same time talking about it. But I don't know, is that the intention of this, is to try to put a standard operating procedure in place where this is what we're going to do with every parcel?
That is the intent.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, if you have the landowner's permission to go out there, but I would say we also don't want to have 8 members of a board calling a landowner and asking if they can go out to their property at different times.
Right.
Need to be considerate of.
But some of it,
As
if I
well.
could continue on with the thought, some of it is like the smaller parcels now, if it's like 500 acres or something like that, we're not going to be driving around in a Jeep like Jurassic Park, something like that. But we might stand on the roadside and take a look in and get an idea on the type of forest, or if it's a estuary or a high tide zone, or if there's an old mobile home park in it or something like that. And that's pretty easy to do. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out as some options, because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan and Jan, but I mean, we can kind of, as a citizen, we can go out and stand on the road in the right of way and look at any piece of property we want to, as long as we're not like trespassing and there's a bulldog chasing you or something like that.
Hypothetically, could you do that? Sure. Is that a consistent way to evaluate properties?
And is it that, are we getting valuable information from that, just looking in from the road? 500 acres, you're not going to get much.
Right.
But a 5-acre parcel, you can see over a 5-acre parcel from the road.
But it may not have road frontage, so.
Yeah.
Sorry, excuse me.
No, you're right.
Did you have?
Sure, if I may.
Yeah.
Aerial views are getting better all the time, so we do have something called pictometry and ArcMap that we can use, which is a shot from an airplane. It's even clearer than our typical aerials. We're also updating aerials yearly now. We have a 23 aerial that's coming out. Property appraiser also has their own layer, so that's almost as good as a site visit. It's not like being there, but I mean, at least it'll give you an idea if it was a dump or if there's structures on the site or trails and that sort of thing.
Certainly.
And this JB pictometry is oblique imagery. You can look at it from top, but you can look at it obliquely, 45-degree angle, and from all 4 cardinal points. You can spin them. And so the ability, just for instance, to identify trees gets tremendous with the oblique imagery. You can say for sure that's an oak tree or that's whatever. So it is a huge tool. It's one that's a great thing to have.
Okay.
But still, nothing better than kicking dirt and walking a trail to get a feel for what's out there.
Right. Well, I feel like we've heard a couple different suggestions. I would say that we put a pin in this one for the time being. I can call some folks at other county programs and see if they have recommendations for how to get advisory groups together to do this, and maybe some other suggestions they may have.
If I
Sure.
could, Jan Brewer, two things. One, I will check, I think we need to check with our legal department on having this volunteer group. And so we'll get some information on that and bring it back to the board. And two, perhaps we could create another form that when someone fills out their piece of property, that the board members here or the volunteer group could actually sort of sign up for slots to have the property owner take them out and show them different areas of the property. So that may be something to consider as well, because then we could assist in navigating, not having several board members out there at one time.
Okay. All right.
Real quick question.
Yes,
Remind
Mr.
me-
Smith.
Yeah, Holly Smith. And we're in the procedure, we're in between initial assessment and.
And the final ranking.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Exactly.
I have to leave. I just wanted to, can I make one comment before I go? I have a doctor's appointment I have to go to. So. As far as the value of the property on the application, I highly recommend that it stays on there because you're within a budget. And you can't be spending $20 million if you only have $2 million to play with in your budget. So I think that dollar value should be on the application.
Here.
Chuck
Thank you.
Robbins, sorry about that.
Okay, so now we've made it to the final assessment and ranking. So we have some additional information that would be provided. We're gonna get everything from the original, right? So we already have a lot of this information that's been compiled during this first assessment. Some type of report potentially from the site visit, just whether it's maybe we talk about doing a verbal report, if we don't wanna have something written. Anything that was requested as additional information during that initial assessment from the board would be provided at this point. I would suggest, and offer up to anyone from county departments who would want to provide input or recommendations for the parcel. They may have some additional information or suggestions they would like to provide. And then any additional information needed to sufficiently address the criteria on our form. Okay, so we need to make sure that when we get to this meeting, we have received all the information that we need to make informed decisions about what's on the criteria form. Okay. I think that's. Okay, yes, and again, the owner would be notified that their property was going to come up for discussion at this meeting. Okay. I think I have a second slide for this step, but are there any questions on what's presented here, Mr. Mitch?
Yeah, the bullet where it says input and/or recommendations from county departments. Obviously, then there's got to be something that is running through the county to alert Real Estate Division, Parks and Rec, Environmental Division. And I would assume environmental is the point person on that. And we would have buy-in from the various agencies to either attend or provide comments. Is that a fair process from environmental?
Or in advance,
Yeah.
written, and it's not required.
Yeah, and I could see, I mean, in my background, I also did planning and zoning, and, I could see planning certainly having some input in terms of trying to establish some boundaries of development patterns and growth. And so I feel like, they could definitely weigh in on some of these acquisitions as far as, does that help them from a long-term planning goals? So, yeah, I love that idea.
Great. Other comments?
I was just going to say, Jan Brewer, a lot of this will come out when you're doing your preliminary assessment. Like if we see something on the ground, we'll actually invite like another county staff member to come in, so you have an opportunity to ask questions of that staff member.
In Jansen plan.
Sorta.
Kind of
The
overarching.
global.
Yeah, you're like this.
All right. Other comments? Ready to move on? We're almost there. We're almost there. Okay. So the goal here is that at this meeting, the board members will come having filled out our criteria sheets, right? So in the agenda packet that we receive, we'll have this information. We'll know this property is coming up. We should be able to, fill out these forms and be prepared to justify our rankings here. So we'll review and discuss the property. If anyone wants to make a case for certain aspects of the property they think should be ranked higher, the owner, if they're interested, we could accommodate them if they wanted to speak to their own property attributes. Following that, if anybody feels like they needed to adjust their scores, right, there would be an opportunity to do so, and then we're going to do like we've done before. You report your score, it's going to be averaged and added to the property ranking list. Okay, so this is basically mostly how we've been operating. Questions about this? Okay. All right, so from this point on, as we just went through this exercise, we choose the top 5 candidates, submit this at least once per year to the county. And from there, we've already talked about this. All right, the commission's going to decide what they want to do with the list. They're going to direct county staff at that point. They'll begin negotiations, goes back to the commission, then we make it to acquisition. Mr. Miller.
That's December, right? We're supposed to submit it? I know there's a little bit of flexibility, but I think that's what the original.
The language says at least once per year.
Okay.
At least once per year.
Right.
Right, so then we make it to acquisition. Yay. Okay, so I've included a few things that we may want to consider for future discussion as relates to our process. In addition to this, we need to think about a cutoff time for applications in advance of a meeting. So how close to a meeting could someone submit a property and it show up on our agenda, right? I don't know if that's 3 weeks, a month. I'd like some input from staff on that. But I think we should consider just setting up a cutoff. I think we should talk about potentially shifting from our bi-monthly meetings to a quarterly meeting schedule, which would accommodate some additional time for evaluation. And this is fairly standard for programs as well. The reason I emphasize that a ranking list goes to the commission at least once annually is because a lot of programs do 2 application periods a year. So you would intake the properties, you evaluate them Q1, rank them Q2, submit to the commission, you do the same thing Q3 and Q4. Not intending for us to talk about this today, but maybe something for future discussion. The other thing I think that we should talk about as a board is how we want to handle that wish list process that we were talking about. If someone on the board wants to nominate a property or thinks we should consider a property or at least have it on the radar, what does that process look like? Is that direction to someone to reach out to the owner, right? To be discussed, okay? So I'm putting these things up here for thought and future consideration. And to address one of your questions, Mr. Minch, so the process here would be that we would revise what is currently written with any adjustments based on your comments and questions today, and then supply that revised version before our next meeting. It sounds like we have consensus on some of the first steps. There's a big question about the site visit, but we have consensus on some of those first steps. Is everyone in agreement on kind of that initial assessment process? Okay, because moving forward, as we start to look at properties, we would initiate that process in July.
So,
Ms. Kaufman.
Irene Kaufman, question for staff. If we were going to change to a quarterly meeting schedule, how far in advance do you do all the meetings for a year as far as public notice and?
Correct. This is Jan Brewer. We would have to re-advertise. Our budget comes in every October, and that's typically when we advertise all the meetings for that entire fiscal year because it's more fiscally sound for the county to have just the one advertisement. So if you change it, we would, like if you decide in this meeting that you want to go quarterly, we would have to advertise then.
How far in advance?
I think it's a two-week or 3-week in advance. We need to advertise to give individuals a chance, 1, to get it on the ad, and then 2, to have individuals a chance to adjust their schedules. And with advertising, the recommendation or the proposal to do it twice a year to go to the Board of County Commissioners, that is an additional expense and cost to us. We would need to get that out there. It will be, usually it's almost 2 months in advance that we have to get on a board hearing, and then we have to get our staff report in. So it would be almost like staff is doing continual turnarounds trying to get this on the board. So it would be better for us to have it once a year, going to the Board of County Commissioners. And then one last comment, I noticed in this document, it's kind of interchanged. Sometimes it says lamp board, sometimes just board, sometimes BOCC. So I think we need some clarity on which board we're talking about for consistency through the document.
Good point. Mhm. Mr. Flowers?
Flowers. I think that we would need, I think it would be advisable to have a calendar that goes along with the process so that we know what meeting or what part of the year we're doing each one of these steps. And as to number of meetings per year, it might be more advisable to advertise 6. And then if we're not going to have a bi-monthly meeting, of course, that's not going to work.
That's not going to work.
Quarterly. I was going to say just cancel the meeting, but then we'll line up. Forget that for last part.
Okay.
I'm not sure that 4 meetings is going to be sufficient to do this. I don't know, maybe it'll get easier as we go along. But I could see in the first part of the year, in the initial evaluation process, maybe you could do that quarterly, but as you get closer to the end of the year, and I think another thing that we need as part of that calendar is when are we going to submit the list? Because we have these bylaws that say we're supposed to make a report by October 1st or in October each year. But the recommendation for the list just says once a year. So we probably need to decide on when we're going to do that. And if we were supposed to submit a report in October that isn't necessarily a list, we need to think about what's going to go into that.
Absolutely.
Another general
Smith.
comment, Holly Smith, is
I'm going to say.
I see the tension of multiple evaluations per year, but I also see the advantage of it in that, being inland, to tell someone, well, we'll get to October and be able to evaluate it, and then, St. Johns County will reach out to you the following year for somebody that's looking to liquidate their asset. Like, you may miss out on solid opportunities. So to have more than one time per year where properties are coming online as available may be more advantageous to the program.
Right, right. And I appreciate all the comments and feedback and thoughts. I think there's more discussion to be had on some of these, but at least just wanted to get through this process, get more clarity before we move on and begin digging back into properties again. And just make sure everybody's on the same page with this. So if there are no other comments from the board,
Thank you for doing
my pleasure. Mr. Minch, you have
this. Yeah.
one last
I
comment?
was also echo, thank you for doing this, because I think it's very logically laid out how it makes sense. And I don't know if this is the appropriate spot for this, but the other thing, in addition to this having on the website, I think it would be helpful to have our criteria that we adopted also on the website, so that even the applicants who are putting the property before the board understand what we're looking at, what we're filling out for them. The matrix sheet, yeah, the matrix sheet to be on the internet website as well. The more, transparent about the process and the tools we're using, the better. So, but if we can add that to the website, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Minch. Other final?
Yeah, this
Mr. Miller?
JP Miller, to further that, because people that are savvy, they know what this being scored, not being ranked, they're going to go, oh, I wasn't going to put that, but I happen to have some cool wetland or something. I'm going to put that, make sure it's all in my application. So there is, and people are always working the system to try and get more points. And I understand that.
Okay. Other final comments from the board before we move to public comment? Hearing none, we will now take public comment on agenda item 3. Any public comment on agenda item 3? All right. Hearing none, we will move on to our board reports. I apologize for speaking this whole meeting, and I'm going to keep talking for a little bit longer. So I do have a few items for reports. So the first is, if you recall, when Commissioner Dean attended our last meeting, and you referenced support for potentially increasing LAMP funding annually to $2 million per year. I would like to propose that this board, the LAMP board, writes a letter to the commission in support of raising the funding to $2 million annually. So in order to do that, I can see if we have consensus here, or hear if anybody has objections to that. We would then work with staff and legal to draft a letter, which I would then sign on behalf of the board and go before the commission. So this would just be a recommendation coming from the board, but I would like to hear if anybody is in favor, opposed.
I'm in favor,
Mr. Miller?
but I hope people don't look at it as gratuitous. It's not, obviously, because we're not benefiting whatsoever from that. But is that something that Keeley,
This is approved by legal,
it is?
yes.
No, never mind. I'm glad that it is. Okay. I support it.
Other thoughts, Mr. Minch?
Yeah, I also agree with the number as far as, I think it's necessary. I think this is the time to make that type of investment, given that St. Johns County is still relatively early in its growth phase, and we've got a lot of developable land still. So absolutely, I think it's a great idea. My only hesitation is although we're making progress today, I'm still not fully convinced this is the right avenue or program to conduct property acquisition in the county. I think it can be done differently, more efficiently. But with that said, I would support it just because I think the money set aside for land acquisition is absolutely the right idea.
Others?
Is that something that we would work on sort of justifying the ask together, or just the request we put in and the
Yeah.
letter gets written?
All I'm looking for at this point is consensus from everyone in this room that this is something we would like to do, and then the language would be handled by staff and legal team.
Would a motion expedite it?
No, just if everyone is in favor, then we can move on. So do I have consensus from this group to send a letter?
Yep.
Yes.
I affirm.
Okay, thank you. Next item I wanted to cover is the St. Augustine National Park and Seashore concept. This is something that has come up in prior meetings. In my very limited research on this topic, I just want to share that national seashores are coastal areas federally designated by Congress as being of natural and recreational significance as a preserved area. These are areas that are managed by the National Park Service, and there has not been a national seashore established since Canaveral in 1975. So I do not believe the national seashore concept to be within the purview of the LAMP board, and do not believe we need to entertain this concept further. Next item on my list.
I'd like to be heard on that.
Is
This is
the-
Slavin. Henry Dean asked this. Henry Dean asked this
Mr.
board
Slavin,
to
you're
address it.
speaking out of turn.
I have my hand
Mr.
raised, and I'm asking to speak on public comment. Henry Dean asked you to address this.
Mr. Slavin, this is not the time for public
I'd like
comment.
to make a presentation at the next meeting on June 13th on National Park and
Can we
Seashore.
turn him-
Henry had promised me that you would hear.
I'm sorry, Mr. Slavin, but you have not been directed to speak. This is not the time for public comment.
I had my hand raised. I'd
I'm
like
going to
speak on this.
continue with the Hamilton Trust parcels. If you may remember from our prior meeting, these were brought up in discussion. This is a property owner who's interested in selling a conservation easement. So I wanted to let you know that we will be bringing those parcels back up at our next meeting. So you will receive information about these in advance, and we will be going through that initial assessment process. Okay, so we'll be running through that. Next item, some other properties that were proposed during our last meeting, which came from members of the board. The Outpost property, the Riverdale Heritage Lands parcels. You know, these are certainly part of that discussion of, you know, how do we work with properties that people want to propose. But at this point in time, I will say we do not currently have an application from the seller. So we won't be able to proceed with evaluation on those properties at this time. With that completes my board report, and I'll go around the room to see.
I don't have a report, I just have a question. How are we going to revisit the procedures?
The process we went through today.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to bring those back up at the next meeting.
Okay, I just want to make sure they don't fall off the table.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right. So if we could go around, if there are any other board reports, Ms. Kaufman?
So I don't really have any board member reports, but I did want to bring something up. Okay. Well, this had to do with properties in the McCullough Creek area. So we've had several in that neighborhood. And going back to our August meeting, there was a staff report that stated, real estate is continuing the discussion with Jacksport regarding the potential to have them donate the adjacent 600 acres of property under a recorded Corps of Engineers conservation easement on the southern side of County Road 13 and along McCullough Creek. Okay. So I just didn't know, that sort of dropped off, that reference to Jacksport, and I didn't know if they are still involved in negotiating with the county and if that property is contiguous to the ones that we're looking at. So I just didn't know if anyone had a status on that, and there it is. Okay.
So, and this is Ryan Malk through the chair. The Jacksport pieces are adjacent. This is the county's McCullough Creek Conservation Area, both here and here, and McCullough Creek actually runs through here. So the Jacksport conservation easements is here. It's the 600 acres you're referring to. This is the piece here, and then this piece here on the south side of County Road 13. So it's directly across the street from McCullough Creek Conservation Area. Those are U.S. Army Corps of Engineers recorded easements already. They're still owned by Jacksport. Back in 2018, when the county was going through the acquisition process for the McCullough Creek Conservation Area, it was agreed to that we would continue discussions with Jacksport to potentially have Jacksport donate the rest of this 600 acres here and here to the county to add to our McCullough Creek. Now that has not proceeded. There's been ongoing discussions with their land managers, but that's basically where it left off. And we, through real estate, have been continuing those discussions. Last time I believe we had an update was a few months back, and it was still, valid. It was, still a green light for that donation, but it has not proceeded past, verbally.
Okay.
This is J.B. Bell. Does the Corps actually hold the CE?
Yeah, it's a core.
They don't do that a lot.
Jan,
I know it's very special because of
It was for the dredging.
because of the port. Okay, wow. I'm surprised that they held it. that just complicates the process, that's all, so everybody knows.
Yeah,
I mean, it is.
okay.
Anything
That's all
else?
I had.
Okay, Mr. Evans?
I don't have any more comments.
All right. Smith, Mr. Minch?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to use this time just to reiterate an earlier point, I think at this meeting, is when volunteering for this board, the way I hope that would run is that it's a visionary board where we proactively identify properties to acquire. And I get more excited about the idea that we can essentially represent the community in a way in which properties they would like to see preserved and have enough time and energy and processes established that would allow us to contact owners and hopefully get them to be willing sellers into our program so we can acquire properties to achieve lots of different countywide goals, whether that's planning or environmental or transportation or utility, and be strategic. And I think it was Chuck Lebanowski who said a few meetings back about being strategic. And so, again, as we get going, we've got an administrative process that we're establishing. We are doing that as a reaction in some ways to the application we received, which is totally understandable. But my hope is that we can make the transition at some point and be a visionary board, a proactive board, and identify strategically which properties would really benefit the county for acquisition and have the processes in place to actually achieve those goals and that vision. So that's all I have.
I agree with what he said.
Scott?
By the way, this is J.B. Miller. Could you introduce the other staff?
I was going to do that. Uh-huh.
Then I will be quiet.
Okay, that will go to the staff reports.
Okay, staff reports. This is Ryan Malk again.
I did have two things.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I just said.
Oh,
sorry,
go
I
ahead.
thought you yielded.
Go ahead.
No, I was not, I'm sorry. I wanted to bring up two quick things. The St. Johns River Water Management District, and we've talked about this a little bit, established their critical wetlands per Senate bill, whatever it was, I don't remember. But anyway, and they did provide a list, and of course they talked with you guys and me as well. But they, I did make some better maps. I guess we need to discuss at some point, maybe for the next meeting. That is without question, should be a very good source of money because they have money to buy some of those critical wetlands. And a couple of those wetlands are within areas that we've been talking about. And so that was something I would like us to maybe do at the next meeting, talk about the next meeting. And the same type of way is the Florida Forever. We do have mapping of what is in the Florida Forever list within St. Johns County, both northeast, what's it called, northeast something blueways. So it's the St. Johns River Blueway and northeast the Florida Blueway. And we should probably look at those as well and see if there's any of those, because those could potentially come with money from the state, with minimal money from the county. You can sometimes turn a $5 million acquisition and maybe only cost the county $1 or $500,000, whatever. With those, though, I will throw out that caveat: somebody has to manage them. It's not like you can just acquire them. It has to be a manager named if you're going to work with the state of Florida. So somebody would have to step up and say, "Yep, we will." That entity, whether it be a local government or a state agency, would have to say that they would manage it. That's probably the biggest hurdle sometimes to overcome, because nobody wants to take on additional lands for management because it costs money. So those are the two points.
Okay, thank you. All right,
Sorry.
now we will
Oh, no problem.
move to staff reports.
Yeah, this is Ryan Malk again with staff. And I wanted to take this opportunity. We have two new specialists since our last LAMP board meeting. The first one is Haley Barkley. She's our environmental specialist and cultural resources specialist, as well as Kirsten Gage. She's environmental specialist, and we're really excited to have them on board. They're helping us out with many things. So they'll be helping assist on staff fronts with the LAMP board, land acquisitions, as well as anything else that we need to have done, map makings, things like that.
be on board. Thank you, all of you.
Okay, next, we wanted to talk about the conceptual management plan per the ordinance. You sort of, Ms. Guthrie, hit on it a little bit. You know, we can certainly, staff can prepare that during the acquisition. It says in the ordinance that it has to be prepared prior to acquisition, you know, later on in the ordinance there. But we do have a template that we have created that basically highlights all of the items that are listed in the acquisition of matrix to also be added to the conceptual management plan, so we can hit that as well. And I don't know if you had anything else to add in that regard, Jan, on the conceptual management plans?
Well, as far as the conceptual management plan, it does read that it will be, I think it said it would be created by the board, meaning you, the board. So we would prepare it, and then if we would bring the conceptual management plan back, there could be some delay, meaning we prepare a conceptual management plan, it comes to you, then there's all this discussion, like take that out, put this in, that sort of thing. So somewhere we need to get to the point where if we're drafting a conceptual management plan, that we don't have that back and forth delay, which would then further delay whatever goes to the Board of County Commissioners. So whatever the process is on preparing that management plan, it needs to be concise, whether it's prepared by you as a group with consensus, or we staff prepare a brief template management plan. So we need to figure out how this is going to be rolled out and who's going to be preparing the plan.
I would suggest maybe if you guys have kind of a template, maybe bring it to us next month, next meeting, and let's start to talk about it and see if there's anything that we think needs to be added to it, you know, from a generic standpoint or particular standpoint, and then maybe go from there. I think you're right. We're not going to be able to sit around and come up with a conceptual management plan for properties, and I think, you know, they're all not necessarily going to be the same. It's going to be depending on what the characteristics are and what it's going to be used for, or what we anticipate it's going to be used for. But I think, yeah, within some categories, we can come up with a generic conceptual plan, because it is just a conceptual plan.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and this is Jan Brewer again, and that's it. I mean, several of our management plans for our properties are like 5 pages. You know, it's not like it's a whole big document. So it's just more of a guiding principles of what will happen on the piece of property. And this is going to be very timely because we're, you know, in May, we're going to get the appraisal started, and then we're going to need a management plan for whatever properties come forward to the board.
Okay, so next in staff reports, we have the Summer Haven Managed Retreat Program, which we provided a couple of documents there from the state, I guess from the House of Representatives as well as the Senate. And I believe there's a $5 million request for a budget line item to be discussed soon at the state level. I believe it's next week is what Shorty Robbins had stated through email. But you can see through that document that that's for the Summer Haven area. I've got it pulled up here just for those that are not very familiar with the area. It's down at the southeast, extreme southeastern corner of the county. And so the managed retreat concept would be to actually go out and see if there's any willing sellers along the Summer Haven area. You know, and anybody who's familiar with this area right here actually has a new inlet. You know,
Did you see it since the storm?
I have not from this new storm, but yeah,
It's ripping right now.
continuing to get larger as we speak and deeper. So, you know, this was an old historic home site area, and there used to be what they termed Old A1A that crossed this area, which is now open beach. And so there are remnant houses up here we call the orphan houses. There's 5 houses that aren't currently lived in, but they're still there, the structures. So, you know, going out and seeking those properties along here to see if there's any willing sellers and, you know, have this pot of money to go out and do that. And it's simply for acquisition of property for maintaining the, you know, it's a highly dynamic area and also for the habitat for, you know, listed species such as marine turtles, and other species that use the dune area. So that's what that information was in that packet there.
Just a quick question on that. So if this is successful, would those houses then be removed?
That's would be the goal.
Yeah.
You know, once they're acquired, any houses remaining would be demolished and,
Yeah.
come back to natural conditions.
Right. That sounds like a pretty good program, Tough area down there.
So this is in this legislative session,
Yes.
Yes.
and has it gone through, has it gone through both chambers? Sorry, Mayor.
There's a separate one for each chamber.
Right.
This is Jan Brewer,
That's what I
so,
saw there. So,
right.
Yeah.
So they're still on the list.
so they're not on rate, they're not even close to like rate acceleration.
No.
Shoot me crazy here.
So question on that, Irene Kaufman. That beach was recently renourished, I believe. I remember they did add sand in front of those houses to try and save them, I guess, and to save the beach. Would that stop?
This is Jan Brewer. That beach is not a renourished beach. It is an engineered beach. And what has occurred out there is what has been termed the FEMA berm. They keep putting a FEMA berm out there. So they put the sand, they sculpt it to try to, in front of the homes to try to protect them somewhat. But that berm now clearly is gone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as opposed to renourishment.
Renourishment is typically, as you know, dredging and
Doing
then
enhanced
spreading out on the
Yeah.
beach. Right.
Right. Thank you.
Ryan, did you have anything else on your?
Just a statement that we have received 2 property application forms in April of 2023. One is off of Brinkoff Road, and another one is off of 605 Favor Dykes Road. So those have been signed forms, and I've forwarded them to Elizabeth for consideration to place on a future agenda.
Great. Anything else?
That's all I have.
Steph, anything?
That's it.
Okay. All right. Well, we have reached the end of our meeting here. So do I have
Public comment?
on staff reports?
No, at the end, we're good.
No, we're good. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor of adjournment? All right.
Yep.
Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned at 2:53.